apps are not bounded by their geographical kind of limit. Your users are, chances are, everywhere, anywhere. You will probably, find similar kind of affinity of users that you find it in home market. It really has kind of unlocked opportunities for, marketers, app developers everywhere to be in global.
You want a market of 6.7 billion potential users or just a few hundred million? Hello and welcome to Mobile Heroes Uncensored. My name is John Kutsier. Our co-host today, of course, is Peggy Ann Saltz, as always. Look, picking the right audience, target audience for your product is absolutely critical. For some apps, it's perfectly excellent to target an audience of just a few thousand people in a very specific vertical. For others, you want millions. For others, billions. All other things being equal, why not go for the billions? Today, we're talking about global expansion, going big, baby. Peggy, who are we talking to?
Well, John, today we have Bessie Byeon. She's Senior Director of Global Marketing at Liftoff, and she's based in APAC. And she combines in her career marketing, product management, commercial strategy into a successful formula that drives results for B2C mobile apps and B2B SaaS products. More importantly, though, she's hands-on in both cases because she's seen marketing from both sides. She started as a gaming app marketer, worked on blockbuster titles, and that helps her help app marketers across all genres and, to your point, going global, because she's here to talk about an ebook produced to help marketers do exactly this. It's called the 2002 Guide to Scaling Mobile Apps Overseas, which is a primer for marketers looking to grow their apps in new markets. And we'll talk about that as well. And again, John, I do my research. Her colleagues describe her as a lively lady who put her best effort forward in her work. It is never boring with her around and when working together. So I think we're in for an exciting show. I'm going to strap myself in for this one. Welcome, Bessie.
Strapping yourself in. Wow.
Absolutely. This is going to rock us.
Wow. Welcome, Bessie. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's a long distance one. You're in Singapore. I'm in Vancouver. It's 10 p.m. for me. It's 7 a.m. for Peggy. It's 1 p.m. for you. Wow. We are struggling today. We are working it. We are putting in the extra effort, but it's all for you. And of course, our audience. Bessie, let's start here. Why should apps consider going global? I mean, I'm doing well in the States. I'm, got my audience here. I've got 20 million DAU or something like that. Everything's going pretty well. I'm making some money. Why should apps consider going global?
You know what? It's a really good question in a sense, because have you seen a lot of apps recently that are actually not global? If you look at probably 10 years ago or 12 years ago, and Peggy mentioned it, I started out as a gaming app marketer. And 12 years ago, I remember apps were not global. People were trying to figure out, hey, what do we do with app stores? Google Play for a while wasn't even out before App Store, right? And everyone had to figure out, should we go global? What does that even mean? And fast forwarding now, it's actually pretty hard to find apps that are not global. And I think it is because, apps are not bounded by their geographical kind of limit. Your users are, chances are, everywhere, anywhere. You will probably, find similar kind of affinity of users that you find it in home market. It really has kind of unlocked opportunities for, marketers, app developers everywhere to be in global. So I guess I kind of reversed that question back. Why shouldn't apps be global?
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Especially, of course, if they're gaming apps, right? And maybe not delivery apps where you don't have resources or local, people, boots on the ground or something like that. But you started out as a gaming app marketer working on blockbuster titles, and they're some of the best examples of apps that do go global. Why is that?
I guess the question back is, why are some apps are so successful globally, right? I think it comes down to, first, you usually don't see any apps that are not successful in their home market that consider going global. You have to be pretty successful. You need to know the product category that you are in inside and out. And then you start looking outwards. And I think we're going to get into a pretty much quite a bit of details in the report, the first thing that comes out is localization. Localization is the foundation.
Now, you, of course, were a gaming app marketer. You worked on big titles. What did you learn about marketing on a global scale from your experience?
I think as a marketer who's going to be very successful, not just in their home market, but globally, you have to be very well versed with your product, right? Just because you are in user acquisition doesn't mean the only thing you should know about are media channels and mixes. The chances are your job is likely to be very complex. And you have to really understand the entire kind of life cycle of your product. It intertwines so that you can, really roll out marketing campaigns that are in tune with, I guess, your product life cycle, with the right goals and, at the right time. And it all at the end connects to whether can you bring the right users at the right time, right? Going back to mobile games, I think mobile games are really a good example of you really having to understand where your product development stages are, and kind of drawing back to my earlier days of the experience. I had apps where you would really start from the dev stage phase for certain, I guess, target markets and segments. And you have to work with them to kind of implement features, and you kind of look at the market and say, hey, do these features actually make sense for these set of users, because they are going to be pretty different depending on which market you are in. And understanding that is the key to having that marketing campaigns or, strategy be very successful. And ultimately, it comes down to KPI being revenue over time. And, 12 years ago, that was true. 10 years ago, that was true. And it still remains to be true.
So you've worked with a lot of marketers, Bessie, and a lot of that went into the ebook we'll be talking about. So drawing from that, from your experience, talking about what they need life cycle approaches and campaigns. Where do marketers, you think, struggle most? And how do you work with them to scale?
The part that they probably struggle, and kind of going back to my earlier point there, right? How do you bring users into your app that would actually provide and bring greater value over time? How do you scale your user acquisition strategy to actually get more users with, higher lifetime value? In the industry, you hear about LTV. Everyone talks about LTV. Ultimately, where the struggle becomes, you may be getting really high value users, but maybe 10 of them only. And the question really becomes, how do I bring 100 of these users? And I think that becomes a real struggle for any marketers anywhere.
So it really boils down to what everyone's talking about, high value users from the get-go. That's one of the pain points. That's where you're addressing this with your ebook. I'd like to just step back for a moment, though, and understand the inspiration for this ebook at this time.
Right. And I think at the beginning, Peggy, you put it really well. A little background kind of here, right? Because my role evolves around, all across global market, I am kind of lucky to be in a very unique position to see notable trends just popping out anywhere and everywhere, right? And we've noticed apps from China, and they are becoming more and more successful. It's not only within their own market, right? Chinese market is huge, but I think more importantly, outside of their home base. So in fact, and I look at market data all the time. If I drove in a little bit of data points by data AI, I was pretty, shocking to see this stat. Over the past 10 years, Chinese developers have nearly doubled their market share in global app downloads. So we thought, hey, going back, games, apps, they are borderless, they are global. And we thought we have perfect examples. And Mobile Heroes program, these marketer communities, and we have amazing Chinese mobile heroes that are so successful overseas. So if they are so massively successful expanding, outside of their home country, we should really share, what they're doing it, how they're doing it, what are the real kind of fundamental tips that we can actually share with the rest of the marketers. And, our Liftoff research and insights team, they work together with our mobile heroes there and, really put together best tips and, insights into this report.
Cool. Looking forward to getting into some of those and also talking about some of those breakout apps as well. Of course, everyone who wants to go global wants to go global, so just sort of automatically, accidentally, virally, like put it on the App Store, put it on Google Play, put it on local third-party Android app stores, and boom, success just happens, just comes. But for most, you're saying you have to build a strong local team from the very start. Why?
It maybe almost sound like a kind of stating the obvious, but it's because different markets, they have different conditions. Users aren't going to accept, the same marketing tactics with the exact same products. And drawing back to, I guess, our report, and one of our heroes there, and I believe the gentleman by, Kevin from Asia Innovation Group, he talked about, hey, you really need to have the local teams there because it provides and it lays a foundation for you to gain speed and scale when you're ready to roll them out. And thinking about kind of having local teams, localization strategy early on, it really provides ability to move really quickly and smoothly when they are ready to go.
It's interesting, right? I mean, because you have to have the local teams. You also have to listen to them. I mean, because they have the local knowledge that you need. And your app, you know what? It may be great for where you are, and maybe the core loop and everything that, the basic mechanics and the levels and they'll all work. But some of the art is deeply disturbing to people in a certain market, or some of the names just don't work or something like that, right? So I guess that's all part of localization as well.
That's right. It's really about understanding and the localizing your product. I mean, you're not going to completely revamp your product, your app entirely, but it is about, hey, how do we tweak here and there so that it's actually aligned with whomever that's going to be using your app?
Makes me think of a story I'm going to share, which isn't often I do that. Yes, it is, because it makes me think of a story way back. It was for Pocket Gamer a while ago, and it was a company, it might have been Supercell, going global with some sort of game, and it was like a total hit. And it was a man wearing a green hat in the game. And they were like, why is this not working in China? It turned out that a man in a green hat is assigned for adultery in China.
I think I recall this story.
We don't want that.
Really? Seriously? And I was like, okay, so that tells us, localization is more than language. It definitely is. Well, how do you see it, Bessie? I mean, we don't have any more men in green hat games. Maybe they learned a long time ago that doesn't work. But what does it include, and what should marketers be prioritizing?
I think, as John mentioned, art styles is a one thing. And I think there was this great example actually in our report, right? So one of our marketers that were featured in the report, and they were releasing basically certain features within the game that had to do with, little gifts and special effects, right? And they, adapted to specific cultures. So, and I'm going to take India as an example. Apparently, in India, there's this big holiday kind of festival that's called Diwali, and it's themed around blessing and exorcism, interestingly. So they would kind of put those content in there to draw the users in. And on the other hand, you have different kind of holidays, religions, centered around religions. So if you had any virtual gifts within the game that had to do with alcohol, they would automatically remove them during their holidays. I think it's aligned to what you said, Peggy, being sensitive to their local culture. But I think another thing here also is an interesting idea about how users actually behave. So it's not just a cultural affinity or cultural kind of preferences. It has to do with how are users in certain markets actually, how do they actually play the game? Another example, I think it was from Avia Games, one of the heroes has mentioned that if you are actually launching a game in Japan and Japanese players are very sophisticated, they are very used to and they can adapt to complex features within the game. So they naturally come to the game with really high expectations. So you have something, a bit of a kind of a sloppy features that you had that may have worked elsewhere is not going to fly in Japan. The team in Avia Games, they had to ask their local colleagues and to actually optimize some of these gameplays so that it matches that high expectation. So understanding what are users' kind of expectations when they play the game in different markets would really be a game changer when you go global as well.
Just thinking about that makes something more complex.
Exactly.
Because
I know, right?
It's a puzzle
Because
game,
it's like,
but it's
no.
not a puzzle game.
No, we have to really up our game literally. It's interesting that it's not just about the game. You're talking about a nuanced approach overall, and it extends to advertising as well. Maybe you can share interesting, unforgettable ads you've seen in new markets.
I look at creatives all the time, right? Both from the marketers that we help them. And I always kind of look up for, hey, are there any interesting story of creatives? So I'm going to share something with you that's actually not particularly for new markets, but I thought it was super interesting. As you know, at Liftoff, we have creative experts, right? They work with, hundreds of our advertising marketers to optimize their creatives, test them and so on. And I learned that in so many markets, failure ads work so well. John, Peggy, have you seen those? Those are kind of gameplay apps. So they mimic gameplay, but you will see like big fail signs. Someone's trying to kind of, they're trapped in some water
Homescapes, Gardenscapes does that all the time. And it's so obvious. And then the virtual player playing the game makes an obvious error and says fail. And you're supposed to feel like super superior and like, I could do that. I'll get the app and show them or something like that, I guess. Yeah.
So actually one of our creative analysts, with at Liftoff, they actually looked into psychology behind it because statistically speaking, they realized 8 out of 10 best performing creative ads actually were these failure ads. And so they thought, hey, what's going on here? And when you look at these ads, like John said, these gameplays fail not because the task at hand is so complex. It's because it was a dumb choice, right? And it turns out psychologically, we usually predict everything with knowledge that we have, right? And we take actions to better predict and avoid surprises. We actually take a lot of pain to try to avoid the surprises in our daily lives. And these gaming ads are kind of unpredictable. So we are kind of surprised when we look at this gaming ad. Oh my God, that was so dumb. So why are they failing? And that makes them kind of curious and I guess motivated to take action. And here the take action being, hey, I'm going to, click on this ad and install the game. And it has worked over and over again.
That is so interesting. Every time
they see it, they'll install
that is so interesting.
Yeah.
I think car manufacturers need to take some lessons from that psychological insight because you can always tell it's a car ad without even, knowing what they've seen a car or knowing what brand it's for. Okay, we've finally got to this point. I want to ask you about breakout apps in China that you think are going to come to the West because new markets, new opportunities, they go both ways. You said, hey, there's mobile heroes in China who are doing incredible things. What are some of the apps that you think are going to become breakouts elsewhere? And maybe even shed a little bit of light on some of the tactics that you're seeing in China that might work elsewhere as well.
John, I wish I could predict the future, right? It's almost like
I'm sorry, we only have guests who can predict the future, so we're gonna have to kick you off now.
Yeah, so what we do, because I can predict the future, I rely on market data, right? And so I feel like I'm kind of managing, not meeting the expectation here, but you've all heard of an app called Shein. And that has been like the, highest performing kind of fast fashion app. So everyone knows what Shein is. I want to call out another app called Cider. You may have heard of this. It's a Beijing-based app. I think they were just founded in a couple of years ago, 2020. And I looked at, data AI, another, sort of market data resource that I look at. And we saw basically massive jumps over 6 months period of time in terms of downloads. Right. And in some markets like France, Germany, so these are, key kind of tier 1 European markets, we saw over 1,000% growth in downloads. It has already started to make a wave in the US as well. I'm not a fast fashion kind of shopper, so it's hard for me to personally connect to a lot of these apps. So I kind of research them around, hey, why are they gaining such a big kind of growth shares everywhere? And another kind of research study, from Kantar, they basically mentioned, hey, they're really into building a community. And then one of the key kind of a differentiator they've been trying to put out is reducing inventory waste. And of course, shipping anywhere have made it really a favorite, for a generation that are already kind of digitally native. So I thought that was really interesting. And, there's another example that I wanted to share with you. And this app, and I believe I am pronouncing this correct, Kwai. And this is a short form video app. Have you heard of this app? They've been around for a very long time, actually. I think they may have been around since like 2013 or so. So it's been like 10 years. But, so it's not a new app. However, they are sometimes called a kind of competitor to TikTok in some markets. I wanted to call this out because as a marketer, it's really interesting to watch how their kind of growth and expansion strategy have unfolded, right? So ever since the release, like I said, it's been, they've been around for close to 10 years or so. They kept a really low profile, but they made a strategic choice to expand to emerging markets. So, those markets are like Indonesia and Brazil. And as of last year, I think, so according to the company themselves, they basically said, hey, we have actually over 1 billion users across, their domestic and international versions of their platform. And I think what's really, interesting here is why are these, one, it's a great example of an app that's really targeting kind of tier one countries, US, Germany, and they look at how are their target audience, and here it's Gen Z, what their behaviors are like. And, they're putting out messaging and positioning, hey, we're reducing waste, we're fast fashion, you're going to get great style really fast anywhere, but we're going to, this is a community, you are reducing waste. So, on one hand, you have these apps, and another app, short form video, we know why TikTok's been so successful. They're taking similar approach, but they're targeting completely different markets, to begin with. They're not saying, hey, we're going to go to the US and trying to big TikTok out of their market. They're basically saying, hey, I looked at, across the globe and we saw big opportunities elsewhere and we're going to gain market shares there. So, those two, I thought it was kind of an interesting story.
It's interesting. It's kind of the rocket internet story from Germany and Europe from the past decade, where they'd see something that worked really, really well in a top market, the US, and copy the model and launch it in Germany or other markets or something like that. Really, really interesting. Over to you, Peggy.
I was going to ask a different type of question, because we're talking about the apps that are successful, and I'm understanding, community is one, or, addressing our motivations. That's about the app. You work with the marketers. These are apps that punch above their weight. So at some level, it's also not just about the Chinese apps, it's about the app marketers themselves. What makes it possible, do you think, in their approach to do so well, to be successful? Is there a different mindset or something you can share from working with them so intimately, so closely?
We speak to these mobile heroes all the time, right? Trying to also uncover their secrets to success. And, I think it all comes down to ultimately this speed and scale. I've mentioned this earlier, and, some of these successes expanding outside really come down to the real fundamentals of them, right? And it's the speed of rigorous testing, the number and amount and the method the pains that they take on to test. And also the speed of kind of setting up operations and launches, from soft launches to real launches. And, it goes back to that, having the foundation of kind of local teams, localizations all set up so that they can really scale them fast when they're ready. That becomes really the key to, I think, them being very successful there. They are fast in evaluating whether they're, largely domestic apps, to that point, fits the overseas markets and where really, right? And how can they attract users? So what's their market fit based on their positioning of the strategies, product? And once they determine these, setting up teams resources, it comes right away. It's quite incredible to see how fast they move.
Super interesting. Well, let's start to bring it to a close here. And Bessie, maybe we can get this from you, your top tip for app marketers who are looking to go global.
I think it comes down to two, right? If you know more about a product category than anywhere else in the world, and you can launch it in, any other markets, why wouldn't you? And I think that's basically the spirit of expanding overseas. You really need to know about the category that they are in. And I think the second part of it is also, kind of a top tip is mobile first approaches. And it kind of sounds weird because we're talking about mobile apps, users on mobile, but you'll be surprised. Some of these apps, because, and of course, web to app is still very important, and, we see a lot of users there. But I think one of the reasons why we see a lot of apps from China, becoming so successful, it's because a majority of Chinese users within China, the first time they ever use the internet is through a mobile device. So it comes to them very naturally to provide the best mobile-oriented experiences, right? And it shows on their marketing strategies too. Having very mobile, first oriented approach and translating that and, making sure that your marketing campaigns are, aligned to that is, I would say, another tip that, we can take away from this.
Wonderful.
Mobile first, you think about it, it's so obvious, but it's so core here. You just woke me up to that thought that it needs to have that approach, that understanding, speed and scale. So many very simple, but very, very strategic tips here. Overall, it's all in the ebook. And Bessie, I know people are going to want to find it, read it. Where can they get the report?
It's at liftoff.io at our resources page. It'll be right out there.
Thank you so much, Bessie. Thank you so much for taking this time and really appreciate the insights.
Thank you for having me.
Again, +1 here as well, Bessie, especially because you are on the ground, literally, and brought those insights with your team into this ebook. Thanks so much for sharing.
And thank you to all listeners. We really do appreciate you. Hope you're enjoying it. Let us know on social if you are.
And let us know if you want to come and we'll have you on the show. If you're a mobile hero or you know of someone who is, then fill out the interest form over at shorturl.at/JKSKT.
Also, Liftoff has a Slack for mobile heroes and people in the mobile ecosystem. There's a link on the screen, and if you're listening to the podcast, it's at info.liftoff.io/Slack-sign-up. It's pretty cool. There's smart people there, and you know what? They probably need you too.
And you have probably been completely blown away by all the insights on this show, and you want your transcript, and you can have it because the transcripts are over at Liftoff's website. Go to liftoff.io, click on Heroes, and then click on Podcast.
I actually personally love transcripts because I read way faster than people talk. So that's a great way to get insights really, really quickly. Until next time, this is John Katsir. Thank you so much for joining.
And this is Peggy Ann Saltz signing off for Mobile Heroes Uncensored.